The galaxy had once been united, a place where different alien species worked together to thrive. The Kryn, an ancient and proud alien race, had once been an important part of this galactic alliance. But years of endless war with the cruel Taraxian Empire had drained their strength. After centuries of fighting, the Kryn were no longer the mighty warriors they once were. Their numbers had dwindled, and their cities were ruins. The galaxy watched in silence as the Kryn were pushed to the edge of extinction. The Taraxian Empire, known for its ruthless conquest of planets, had finally cornered them. The Kryn, exhausted and broken, sent out desperate pleas for help, but their calls fell on deaf ears. The leaders of the galaxy, who had once promised to help each other in times of need, turned their backs on the Kryn. They believed the Kryn's extinction was inevitable and didn't want to risk their own forces to save them. Among the leaders who abandoned the Kryn was the Galactic Council, a group made up of powerful species. They claimed that the Kryn's fate was sealed, and no amount of support could change that. The Taraxians were simply too strong. The Council decided that it was not worth the risk to send their fleets to help the Kryn, and so they allowed them to fight alone. But one ship, the Valor, ignored the Council's decision. Captain Mara, a human leader with a strong sense of honor, could not stand by and watch the Kryn fall without even a fight. Humanity, though small in comparison to many of the galaxy's great species, had a history of standing up for the underdog. The Valor, a ship of humans, was not the biggest or the most advanced, but it was fueled by something no empire could defeat: determination. Mara had heard the Kryn's distress signal as she was patrolling a quiet part of the galaxy. She had no plans to interfere in the war between the Kryn and the Taraxians, but when she listened to the message, something stirred in her. The Kryn were asking for help. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of being wiped out. Yet their voice echoed with one last bit of hope, a cry for help that was being ignored by everyone else. Captain Mara knew that to help the Kryn would be a huge risk. She could already imagine the consequences. The galaxy would see it as a foolish move, a waste of resources. The Taraxians would see it as an act of war. But Mara couldn't ignore what was right in front of her. Humanity had a long history of defying the odds. There was no way she could leave the Kryn to perish without even trying to help. Her crew, though small and inexperienced compared to the galaxy's larger fleets, stood by her decision. They were ready to fight, not just for their own survival, but for the survival of a race that had been abandoned by all. The Valor set course for the Kryn's last known position, and with each passing moment, the weight of their mission grew heavier. When the ship finally reached the Kryn's location, they found a scene of devastation. The Kryn were scattered across a dying planet, their once beautiful cities reduced to rubble. Some of the survivors had gathered together in a small, hidden city, hoping to stay out of the Taraxian Empire's reach. It was clear that the Kryn had no place to run, no place to hide. Captain Mara's heart sank when she saw the state the Kryn were in. They were weak, their morale shattered. But even in their broken state, they held on to one thing: hope. Their leaders, however, were not convinced. They had lost faith in the galaxy, and even though Mara's arrival was a sign of humanity's commitment to help, they feared that it was too late. The Kryn Council met with Captain Mara, and their conversation was filled with distrust and bitterness. "Why should we trust you?" one of the Kryn leaders asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The galaxy has turned its back on us. Why should you be any different?" Mara could understand their pain, their feeling of abandonment. The galaxy had ignored them, and now their people were dying. But she refused to give up on them. "Because we're human," she said firmly. "And humans don't turn away from those in need. We fight, we stand together, and we never abandon anyone." The Kryn leaders were silent, unsure of how to respond. They had been betrayed for so long that they could not believe in the kindness of others. But Captain Mara's words struck a chord deep inside them. Could it be true? Could humanity actually stand by them when no one else would? As the Valor prepared to defend the Kryn, Mara knew this would not be easy. But in the depths of despair, she saw a glimmer of hope. The galaxy had turned its back on the Kryn, but humanity had chosen a different path, one of honor, compassion, and the will to fight against impossible odds. Captain Mara stood on the bridge of the Valor, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space before her. The Kryn's homeworld was now just a shadow of what it once had been, a beautiful planet ravaged by war. The Kryn survivors were scattered in a small, hidden city, and their situation was dire. As the Valor approached their position, Mara could feel the weight of the decision that had brought her here. She had no illusions about the difficulty of what lay ahead. The Taraxian Empire was relentless and had no mercy for the weak. The Kryn were on the edge of extinction, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. But humanity had come. The Kryn city appeared small and lifeless from space, their once grand structures now reduced to rubble. The survivors were huddled in what remained of their defenses, fearful that any moment could bring the end. Mara's heart sank as the Valor descended toward the planet. She had come to help, but the Kryn were not so easily convinced. They had been abandoned by everyone they trusted, and their faith in outsiders had been shattered. When the ship touched down on the planet, a group of Kryn officials came to meet them. They were tired, their faces worn by the constant struggle for survival. Captain Mara stepped forward, meeting their gaze with a firm, unwavering resolve. The Kryn were skeptical, their trust broken by the betrayal of the Galactic Council. One of the Kryn leaders, an elderly alien with a stern face, spoke first. "You are humans," he said, his voice full of doubt. "What makes you different from the rest of the galaxy that has turned its back on us?" Mara understood the bitterness in his tone. After all, the Kryn had watched as their allies abandoned them in their darkest hour. Their people had been forced to fight alone for far too long. But Mara's answer was simple, and it came from the heart. "Because we don't abandon those in need. Humans have always fought for what's right, no matter the odds," she said, "and we won't let the Kryn be destroyed without a fight." The Kryn leaders exchanged uncertain glances. They wanted to believe her, but after so much pain, so many broken promises, their hope was fragile. Mara could see the doubt in their eyes, and she knew it would take more than words to win their trust. It would take action. "We have nothing left to lose," the Kryn leader said quietly. "But if you're serious about helping us, prove it." Mara nodded, understanding what had to be done. The Valor was small, and the humans had no grand fleet to back them up. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in creativity, strategy, and a willingness to fight for others. She turned to her crew, who were standing by, ready for whatever came next. "We'll show them," she said to herself, more than anyone else. The Valor's crew quickly began setting up a base of operations on the planet, building defenses and preparing for the worst. The Kryn's few remaining warships were in no condition to fight, and most of their technology had been destroyed. But Captain Mara knew that humanity's strength wasn't just in advanced weapons or starships. It was in their ability to think outside the box and adapt to any situation. Mara began speaking with the Kryn scientists, offering them the help they so desperately needed. While the Kryn had lost much of their technology, they still had knowledge that could be used. The humans worked alongside them, sharing their own technology and ideas. It was a slow and difficult process, but the two races were starting to trust each other. The Kryn saw how the humans were willing to teach, to collaborate, and not just command. For the first time in years, the Kryn felt a flicker of hope. Their fighters were being repaired, their defenses reinforced, and their people started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive. But they knew that this would not be enough. The Taraxians would come, and they would bring their full force. No matter how much they rebuilt, they would be outnumbered. They would be fighting against an empire with endless resources, while they had only the human ship and a handful of allies. Mara understood this more than anyone. She had no illusions about what the Taraxians were capable of. But she also knew one thing: she would never back down. She had made a promise to the Kryn, and she intended to keep it. The humans began training the Kryn soldiers, teaching them new tactics that emphasized flexibility and teamwork over brute force. The Kryn were strong, but they had been worn down by years of war. Now, with the humans' help, they would become something more than just survivors. They would become a united force, one that could stand up to the Taraxian Empire. As the days passed, the Kryn began to regain their strength. The city, once filled with despair, now hummed with activity. The humans and the Kryn worked side by side, determined to make a stand. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of doubt, but slowly, a sense of unity began to take shape. Captain Mara watched as the Kryn warriors trained, their movements becoming more precise, more confident. The humans were teaching them that victory didn't always come from overwhelming power. It came from cleverness, from outsmarting your enemy. It came from never giving up, even when everything seemed lost. For the first time in a long while, the Kryn had something they had lost long ago: hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was enough. The galaxy might have turned its back on them, but humanity had stepped forward to stand by their side. And in that moment, both races realized that no matter how dark the future seemed, they would face it together. The days grew darker as the valor continued to strengthen the Kryn's defenses. Captain Mara had seen the determination in her crew's eyes as they worked tirelessly, and she had seen the Kryn warriors slowly gaining confidence. But everyone knew the hard truth: the Taraxians were coming, and they would not stop until the Kryn were completely wiped out. Mara stood at the front of the command center aboard the Valor, watching the galaxy map on the display screen. The Taraxian fleet was on the move, heading toward the Kryn homeworld. Their ships were massive, designed for nothing but destruction. The Taraxians had an army that could overwhelm any resistance, and they had never hesitated to crush anyone who stood in their way. The Kryn's hope had begun to grow, but it was fragile, like a flame in the wind. They had no illusions about the size of the Taraxian fleet. Despite the humans' best efforts, they were still vastly outnumbered. Yet the one thing that gave Mara hope was the spirit of the Kryn. They had endured so much, and they were not ready to give up yet. "We don't have much time," Mara said, her voice steady as she addressed the Kryn commanders. "The Taraxians are getting closer, and we need to be ready." The Kryn generals nodded in agreement. They were a proud race, and their eyes burned with the desire to protect their people, even in the face of certain defeat. They had seen what the Taraxians could do to their homeworld, and they would not allow it to happen again. Mara looked over the plans they had developed with the Kryn scientists and military leaders. The strategy was simple. They would use the terrain of the planet to their advantage. The Kryn cities were built with great care, and some of the ancient ruins that still remained could provide excellent cover. The humans had also trained the Kryn soldiers in guerrilla tactics, teaching them how to use the planet's natural defenses to disrupt the Taraxian forces. They would not win with brute strength, but with cleverness and surprise. The Valor would be the key to the plan. It was small compared to the Taraxian warships, but it was fast and maneuverable. The crew of the Valor would strike first, hitting the Taraxians' weak points and drawing their attention away from the Kryn forces. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. Mara sat down at her station, her mind racing. She knew that once the Taraxians arrived, there would be no turning back. The Kryn's survival depended on this fight. The hope they had regained could be shattered in an instant if they weren't careful. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Jace, her second in command. He looked tense, his face a mask of concentration. "We've just picked up a transmission. It's from the Taraxian fleet." Mara straightened. "Patch it through," she said. The screen flickered, and a cold, emotionless voice filled the room. The Taraxian commander appeared on the screen, his face covered in alien scars, his eyes cold and calculating. "You humans, and your foolishness," the commander sneered. "You think you can stop us? The Kryn will fall, and you will be crushed along with them." This war is over. Mara stood tall, her expression unshaken. We haven't given up, and we won't. The Kryn will fight, and we will fight with them. You won't win this time. The Tyrexian commander let out a mocking laugh. You are nothing. Just a small ship and a handful of weaklings. We will crush you all. The transmission ended abruptly, and Mara's crew fell into a heavy silence. There was no mistaking the cold threat in the commander's words. The Tyrexians would not hesitate to destroy them all. But Mara's resolve only hardened. The Tyrexians had underestimated humanity before, and that would be their mistake. She had seen what humans were capable of when they fought for what was right, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Prepare the valor, Mara said, her voice firm. We're going to make them regret underestimating us. The Kryn leaders stood beside her, their faces determined. They had seen what the humans were capable of, and they believed in the plan. Even though they were outmatched, they were ready to fight for their survival. As the Valor launched from the surface of the planet, the crew moved quickly into action. The ship's weapons systems powered up, and the engines hummed with energy. The Tyrexians may have had the numbers, but the humans had something else: ingenuity, resourcefulness, and the will to win. The battle ahead would not be easy, but Captain Mara knew that they had one advantage that the Tyrexians couldn't predict: the strength of their unity. Humans and Kryn, working together, would fight with everything they had. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of a race that had been abandoned, for a race that still believed in the possibility of hope. And Mara, as the captain of the Valor, would lead them through the storm, no matter how fierce the enemy might be. The Valor sped through space, its engines humming with power as Captain Mara and her crew prepared for the most important battle of their lives. The Tyrexian fleet was now only hours away, their enormous warships closing in on the Kryn homeworld. The Kryn, alongside the humans, had prepared the best they could, but everyone knew the true test was about to begin. This would not be a battle won by sheer force, but by skill, strategy, and the unbreakable will to protect what remained. Mara stood at the front of the command center, her eyes scanning the starry void ahead. The first wave of Tyrexian ships would be upon them soon, and everything depended on the success of the initial strike. The Valor was small compared to the enemy warships, but it was fast and agile. It was a ship designed for skirmishes, not all-out war. Their goal was simple: distract the Tyrexians, make them waste precious time, and give the Kryn forces a fighting chance. Lieutenant Jace, Mara called out, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Is the ship ready for the first strike? Yes, Captain, Jace replied, his face serious as he worked at his station. All systems are good to go. We've aligned the weapons systems and have prepared a series of decoy signals to confuse the enemy. Mara nodded. The decoys were critical to their plan. If they could confuse the Tyrexians into thinking the Valor was a larger fleet, they might have a chance to buy the Kryn more time to organize their defense. We'll need to stay ahead of them. Outmaneuver them, she said. Remember, we're not trying to win the battle, just to make them lose their focus. Let's get them chasing shadows. The crew around her busied themselves, finalizing preparations for the mission. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a quiet determination in the air. They all knew what was at stake: the survival of the Kryn race and the fragile hope that humanity had given them. As the Valor approached the coordinates where the Tyrexian fleet was expected to arrive, Mara's mind raced. She knew that the Tyrexians would expect a direct confrontation. They were an arrogant species, relying on their superior numbers and firepower. But the humans and the Kryn had learned to think differently. Their plan was to use speed and surprise to their advantage. Suddenly, the communication officer's voice broke the silence. Captain, we've got a visual on the Tyrexian fleet. They're entering the system. Mara's heart skipped a beat as the massive warships appeared on the screen. There were dozens of them, hulking vessels bristling with weapons. The sheer scale of the Tyraxian fleet was enough to make anyone doubt their chances of survival. But the humans weren't here to back down. They were here to fight. "Prepare the decoys," Mara ordered. "We hit them fast and hard. Don't give them a chance to focus on us." The Valor's engines roared as it shot forward, its speed pushing it far ahead of the Tyraxians. The decoy signals were activated, sending false readings to the Tyraxian ships. The Valor moved like a shadow in the dark, dancing around the massive warships, making it seem as though the humans had sent in a much larger fleet. From their perspective, the Tyraxians saw what appeared to be multiple ships flashing across their sensors. The enemy fleet began to split into smaller groups, trying to chase down the false signals. Mara could feel the adrenaline coursing through her as she watched the chaos unfold. They were doing it. They were making the Tyraxians panic. But Mara knew it wouldn't last long. The Tyraxians were a powerful and disciplined force. They would eventually realize they had been tricked. They needed more than just distractions. They needed to deliver a strike that would make the Tyraxians think twice before attacking again. "Lieutenant, ready the main guns," Mara said. "We're going in for the real hit." Jace nodded, quickly adjusting the ship's targeting system. "Ready, Captain." The Valor dove toward one of the larger Tyraxian vessels, its weapons powered up and primed. The enemy fleet had been thrown into disarray, but they were beginning to regroup. The first shot rang out, a burst of energy that struck one of the Tyraxian ships, causing a massive explosion. It wasn't a kill shot, but it was enough to send a clear message. The Tyraxian fleet roared back into action, turning their attention to the Valor. The humans had made their first strike, and now it was time for the real battle to begin. "Captain," shouted one of the Kryn officers, who had been watching from the command center. "The Tyraxians are targeting us. They know it was a diversion." Mara's jaw clenched as she watched the incoming fire from the Tyraxian ships. They had only moments before the real fight would begin, but the damage they had caused would not go unnoticed. They had disrupted the Tyraxian formation, forcing them to react. But now the humans had made themselves a target. "Brace for impact," Mara ordered, her voice calm but urgent. The Valor dodged and weaved through the incoming fire, its shields absorbing the hits. The ship groaned as it took damage, but the crew's training held strong. The ship's agility made it difficult for the Tyraxians to land a clean shot. For now, they were still alive, and that was enough. The battle had truly begun, and Captain Mara knew that this was only the beginning of a long, difficult struggle. But as long as they stayed united, as long as they fought together, there was still hope. The Tyraxians might have the numbers, but humanity and the Kryn had something more powerful: the will to fight for survival. The battle raged on in the cold expanse of space. The Valor was outnumbered, its small size no match for the Tyraxian fleet's sheer power. Yet Captain Mara and her crew refused to back down. They had struck the first blow, and they would keep fighting, even if the odds were stacked against them. Mara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the chaotic scene unfold on the command center's display. The Tyraxian ships, furious after the Valor's hit, were closing in fast. They had already begun to retaliate, and their firepower was overwhelming. The Valor had dodged as much as it could, but the ship was taking hits, its shields weakening with every strike. "Captain, we're losing shields," Lieutenant Jace called out from his station, his voice tight with urgency. Mara's eyes locked onto the display. The shields were flickering, barely holding together as another blast hit the ship's side. The Valor rocked violently, the lights dimming for a moment before flickering back on. She could feel the crew's unease, but none of them were showing fear. They had a job to do, and they were determined to see it through. "Keep the shields up as long as you can," Mara ordered, her voice steady despite the tension. "We need to keep moving. Don't let them get a clear shot." She quickly turned to the Kryn officers who were helping with the ship's operations. "Get the decoy signals ready again. We need to confuse them one more time." The Kryn officers nodded and began to work quickly, activating the decoy systems once again. Meanwhile, the Valor darted through the battlefield, moving as fast as it could to avoid the Tyraxian onslaught. The ship's speed was its greatest asset, but the constant barrage of enemy fire was beginning to take its toll. Then, just when it seemed like the battle might slip away from them, a new voice crackled over the comms. It was a Kryn general, his tone tense but filled with hope. "Captain Mara, we've received word from the other Kryn forces. They've successfully set up the ambush points as planned. We're ready to strike back." Mara's eyes widened. The Kryn had been preparing to launch their own counterattack, but she had no idea they were this close to being ready. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The Tyraxians were distracted, focusing all their energy on the Valor. And now the Kryn could strike back with the element of surprise. "All right, let's turn the tide," Mara said firmly. "Tell them to proceed, and make sure the Tyraxians don't know what hit them." The Kryn fleet, though smaller than the Tyraxian armada, had been quietly preparing for this moment. They had learned from the humans' tactics, using the planet's natural defenses to hide their movements and outsmart their enemies. Now, with the Tyraxians' attention drawn toward the Valor, the Kryn were in a perfect position to strike. The ground shook as the first wave of Kryn ships erupted from their hidden positions, catching the Tyraxian fleet by surprise. The Tyraxians, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to adjust. But it was too late. The Kryn ships, using their newfound tactics and knowledge, attacked with precision, targeting the Tyraxian vessels' weak points. "Captain," Lieutenant Jace called out, his voice filled with excitement. "The Tyraxians are starting to panic. They didn't expect this." Mara allowed herself a small smile. The Tyraxians had been so sure of their victory that they had underestimated the Kryn. They had been wrong. The Valor moved swiftly through the battlefield, striking once more at the Tyraxian ships. With the Kryn forces now actively engaging, the balance of the fight had shifted. The Tyraxians were no longer able to focus on just one target. They were forced to divide their attention between the Valor and the Kryn, struggling to keep up. "Captain," Jace said, sounding even more urgent now, "the Tyraxians are retreating. They're pulling back from their front lines to regroup." Mara's eyes widened. It was happening. The Tyraxians, the feared conquerors of many worlds, were retreating. This was their moment. "Don't let up," Mara commanded. "We strike while they're weak. Push them back as far as we can." The Valor and the Kryn fleet surged forward, taking advantage of the confusion and disorder within the Tyraxian ranks. Every strike they landed felt like a victory. Every inch of ground they gained felt like a step closer to saving the Kryn homeworld. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Tyraxians were a force to be reckoned with, and while they were retreating now, Mara knew they would soon regroup and launch another assault. This was only the first phase of their struggle. They had won the first round, but there was still much more to do. "Keep pushing forward," Mara yelled to her crew. "We've got them on the run. We finish this now." The Valor and the Kryn forces moved in perfect unison, continuing their assault against the retreating Tyraxian fleet. But in the back of Mara's mind, she knew they couldn't afford to become overconfident. The Tyraxians might be retreating for now, but they would be back, and they would come back stronger than ever. For now, though, the humans and Kryn had won a crucial victory. The tide had turned, and Mara allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she would not forget the long road ahead. As the Tyraxian ships began to pull back into the darkness of space, Mara looked at her crew. They had fought hard and won the day, but there was still much to be done. "We did it," Mara said quietly, her voice full of pride. But she knew that the war was far from over. The real fight was just beginning. The calm after the battle was almost eerie. The Valor floated in the vast emptiness of space, its hull scarred from the recent fight, but the Tyraxian fleet had retreated. The Kryn ships, though smaller in number, had played a pivotal role in pushing the enemy back. The Tyraxians had underestimated them. and now they were paying the price. Captain Mara stood at the command center, her eyes locked on the displays. She had allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew better than to relax. The Tyraxians wouldn't stay quiet for long. They were a powerful force, and a retreat was only temporary. Soon, they would regroup and return. "Captain," Lieutenant Jace said, his voice tight with both relief and worry. "The Kryn fleet is reporting damage. It's not as bad as we thought, but they've lost a few ships in the skirmish. We'll need to help them patch things up." Mara nodded. She had expected as much. The Kryn had proven themselves capable allies, but they were not without their own struggles. The Tyraxians had gone after their weaker points, and the Kryn had fought valiantly to keep their side of the battle intact. "Prepare the repair teams," Mara ordered. "We'll send over supplies and medical aid. They're part of our fight now." As the crew of the Valor scrambled to assist their Kryn allies, Mara's mind wandered back to the larger picture. This wasn't just about one battle. This was about the survival of two species, humans and Kryn, against a relentless enemy that had shown no mercy. The Tyraxians didn't care who they crushed underfoot, and Mara knew it wouldn't be long before they returned with reinforcements. "Captain, we've received a transmission from the Kryn High Command," said Ensign Delia, her voice carrying through the silence of the command center. "They want to discuss the next phase of our strategy." Mara's heart skipped a beat. The Kryn had been hesitant at first, unwilling to trust humanity with their defenses. Now, they were working together, but that didn't mean they didn't have their doubts. It wasn't easy for an alien race to put their faith in humans, especially after centuries of isolation and conflict with other species. "Put it through," Mara said, trying to sound calm despite the uncertainty she felt. The face of General Izira appeared on the screen, her alien features sharp and serious. The Kryn were a proud species, and General Izira's stern expression showed just how much was at stake. She had been a key figure in their fight against the Tyraxians, and Mara respected her leadership. "Captain Mara," Izira said, her voice low and steady, "we have much to discuss. While we are grateful for your help, this fight is far from over. The Tyraxians will return, and they will bring reinforcements." Mara met Izira's gaze. "We know. We're not letting up, General. We'll stand with you. Together, we can push them back for good." Izira nodded, but the look in her eyes suggested doubt. "We must also consider the cost. The Kryn people have already sacrificed much. If we continue down this path, we may lose everything. Are you prepared to lose more than just lives?" Mara didn't hesitate. "We've already lost so much, but the alternative is worse. We can't let the Tyraxians win. Not now. Not ever." Izira studied her for a long moment. "Very well, Captain. We'll continue the alliance. But know this, we do not fight just for survival. We fight for our future, for our people. If we fall, the Tyraxians will spread their destruction across the galaxy." Mara nodded. She understood the weight of Izira's words. This wasn't just a fight for their survival. It was a fight for their way of life. The Kryn had already suffered at the hands of the Tyraxians, and they couldn't afford to lose any more. Neither could humanity. As the transmission ended, Mara turned to her crew. She could see the same determination in their faces that she felt in her heart. The Kryn weren't just allies. They were family now. The battle was far from over, but together, they stood a chance. The next few days were filled with repairs, strategy meetings, and preparations. The Kryn High Command had agreed to share more information on the Tyraxian fleet's movements. They had tracked the enemy's movements for years and had managed to stay one step ahead. But now the tables had turned. It was time for humanity and the Kryn to take the fight to the Tyraxians, not just defend against their attacks. Mara stood on the bridge of the Valor, watching as the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of the war. The ship had taken damage, but it was still functional. The repairs were ongoing, but there was no time to rest. "Captain," Lieutenant Jace called out, "the repairs are nearly complete. We're ready to move out." Mara nodded, her gaze turning to the vast emptiness of space. "Get us in position, Jace. We're going after the Taraxians." She knew this wouldn't be easy. The Taraxians were ruthless, and their fleet was massive. But Mara wasn't the type to back down. She had seen what humanity and the Kryn could do when they worked together. She had seen the strength they possessed. This battle would be different. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future where they wouldn't have to live in fear. They were fighting for their children, for their homes, for the future of the galaxy. Mara turned to her crew, her eyes shining with determination. "Let's finish this." As the Valor moved into position, ready for the next phase of their mission, Mara knew that this was just the beginning. There would be losses, there would be sacrifices, but they would stand firm. Together, humans and Kryn would fight until the Taraxians were no more. And they would win. The stars above were silent as the Valor drifted toward its next target. Captain Mara stood in the observation deck, looking out at the vast expanse of space. It had been days since they had last encountered the Taraxian fleet, but the tension in the air hadn't gone away. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The war was far from over, and even though their victory was within reach, the hardest battles were yet to come. Lieutenant Jace approached, his face filled with resolve. "Captain, the fleet is ready. The Kryn have confirmed their readiness too. We've prepared everything we can for this final strike." Mara turned her gaze to him, her eyes filled with determination. "It's now or never, Jace. We take the fight to them. We show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity and the Kryn." The war against the Taraxians had been long and painful, but through it all, Mara had seen something extraordinary. She had witnessed the courage, the resilience, and the unwavering determination of her crew and their Kryn allies. Together, they had proven that they could stand against the most terrifying force in the galaxy. Across the bridge, the crew worked tirelessly, their faces a mixture of focus and exhaustion. The damage from the last battle had been significant, but it was nothing the combined forces of humanity and the Kryn couldn't handle. Repair teams had been working around the clock, and now, the Valor was ready for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. "Captain," Ensign Dilia called, her voice steady but urgent. "The Taraxian fleet is moving. They're in range." Mara nodded, her hand gripping the edge of her command chair. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The battle would decide everything, the survival of two species, and the fate of the galaxy itself. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, not now. "We're going in," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Let's make sure they never forget what happened when they tried to destroy us." The Valor surged forward, the engines roaring as it accelerated toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The Kryn ships followed closely behind, their sleek forms cutting through space with deadly precision. It was a sight to behold. Two races, united by a common cause, prepared to face down the enemy together. On the communication screen, General Azura's face appeared once more, her expression resolute. "Captain Mara, we are with you. This ends today." Mara met the general's gaze. "Together, we will win this. For the future." The battle began with a deafening roar as the Taraxian fleet fired the first shots. The enemy was relentless, but the Valor and the Kryn ships were faster, more agile, and better prepared than they had ever been before. Every shot that hit its target felt like a victory. Every enemy ship that fell was a reminder of how far they had come. Captain Mara stood tall, watching as her crew responded with expert precision. The command center was alive with the sound of orders being given, damage reports coming in, and the hum of engines pushing forward. She could feel the energy of the crew, focused, determined, and ready to fight until the end. Suddenly, the Taraxian flagship appeared on the screens, looming large and powerful. Mara knew this would be their biggest challenge yet. The flagship was the heart of the enemy fleet, and if they could destroy it, the rest of the Taraxian forces would fall apart. "Target the flagship," Mara ordered, her voice steady and filled with authority. "Full power to the weapons. Let's finish this." The Valor and the Kryn ships charged forward, weapons blazing. A volley of missiles struck the Taraxian flagship, and for a moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach. But the flagship retaliated with a barrage of fire, and the Valor shook violently as it took several hits. "Shields are holding," Jace shouted, his voice filled with both relief and concern. "We can do this." Mara didn't answer immediately. She was focused on the mission. Every moment felt like an eternity as she watched the Valor and the Kryn ships push forward, each strike bringing them closer to their goal. Then, with a final, coordinated assault, the Taraxian flagship erupted in a blaze of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through space, and for a moment, everything went silent. The battle was over.